All right, everybody, we don't know quite when we're starting, but I have to do a few things on YouTube before I can officially greet everybody. So you're kind of in the back end of a studio watching somebody do the back end work. And it just said something very strange. So we will see how it goes. We're just going to pause a minute. I need to send Christina a message because it said private and it shouldn't say private.
It does say we're live.
And we are live, but it also says live private. So I'm not quite sure what that means. Just hold on, everybody. We're on the back end studio. I need to make sure it's not private.
Right.
Okay, we're good now. So, hi, everybody. My name is Tantra Mott. Who's with us today is Victoria McMahon, Deborah Merchant, Janice Cronetti, Liz Geyer, and Electra Porzel. Who's not with us today is Lori Candon, and she couldn't be with us today because she is doing her own retreat in Costa Rica. So she's here energetically, and we're here publicly. So I had the opportunity to have a conversation yesterday, and it's interesting when you try to talk about Create a World. And for any of you watching or watching later, when we talk about we're interested even in a world being created, we all come with pre-existing notions of what that means. So it's a little bit hard to talk about this notion that we've been living in called Create a World. And basically, it comes from one of the fundamental tenets of the creation exercise, the creation templates, the observing, which is just being present to what there is to be present to, open it up into what there's to open up to and see what we got, basically. So particularly today's conversation is about fear. And and this is another challenge with Create a World. We're not here to solve your problems. We're really here to be in our own experiences, share our own experiences. And we have found that when human beings gather together and share with each other, there's a strength, stamina, capacity that becomes available that isn't about answers to questions. It's literally about being together and literally about the strength of the ability to be transparent and vulnerable and alive with each other and making things visible that for a large part, particularly in the Society of the United States of America, these hidden fears, these hidden concerns, these worries, you're supposed to just know the answer and you're just supposed to apply the answer. And then the problem's just supposed to be solved and then to get on your business. It's probably why people marry a lot in this culture. So we're not doing that today. And we really hope that you'll be with us today in a manner that is because you enjoy our company and you enjoy being the presence of our company, because we can all promise you we do definitely love being in your company. And even though we may not visually see you, we know you're there. And we know this is why we weekly are faithful in finding a way to be on this YouTube channel, Create a World. So that said, I want to open it up to all of us to see who wants to start the conversation. And I don't want it to be me.
I'll start. Hi everybody. I'm Janice Cronetti. I'm down here in Florida, and why I'll say that is because living here, part of what has come into the dance of my life is dealing with hurricanes, and people who have lived in Florida their entire life tend to have a way of dealing with hurricanes, and people who are newer to Florida tend to have a way of dealing with hurricanes. But that is definitely a place for me where I have to become aware of what fear is telling me, and to move with it rather than try to fight against it. Because of course, people have died in hurricanes here in Florida, and so that fear is legitimate. But there's also a question of recognizing what I can and can't do in regards to the hurricane itself. And thus, what does that mean for me? But the other thing that I wanted to share about fear is that, so I'm a performer, I'm an actor. I've been acting for over 40 years. But in the last couple of years, I wrote and performed for the very first time in my life a one-woman show. And as an actor, like the very first time I did something, I think it was probably a school concert or something like that. And I was nervous. And my mother asked me, do you have butterflies in your stomach? And I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, here, give them to me and I'll hold them for you till the performance was over. And so that served me as a performer for decades, until it was the very first time I was going to be performing my one-woman show. And I had to be at the theater super early because we were live streaming. This was just coming out of COVID. And so there were all kinds of preparations that we had to do. And so I was at the theater a number of hours before I was going to be performing. And all day long, my stomach was just churning and I was so agitated. And at one point I was like, why am I so agitated? And then all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, oh, this is stage fright. Like, this is what people have been talking about all these years. And man, they're right. It sucks. I don't like this one bit. And I've continued to have some of that as I've moved in additional performances. And so for me, it's ignoring it was not the approach. Like, just trying to ignore it was not going to solve anything for me. And so it was really about entering into a dialogue with stage fright, and saying, what do you want me to know? And part of that is, I'm used to being on stage with other people, so there's a little bit more of a safety net. And when it's just me, there's not that safety net. So then, then what does it mean about additional ways that I need to prepare or be able to move in a situation? Or, and the very first time I performed, I went in acting, we say, if you forget your lines, we call that going up. And I went up twice, but I just did what I'm trained to do as an actor, which is stay in the moment, keep moving, and then the lines eventually came to me. But to me, the importance in what I'm sharing is giving that fear a place, because and emotions in general, emotions are in our lives to tell us important things. And when we can stop and give the emotion a place, we can get what we need to get from the emotion, and thus it's easier for that emotion to continue to move through us. And and so the whole, oh, well, just, shake it off. It's like, well, but shaking it off isn't actually gaining me the wisdom that fear wants me to have. And so to me, there's power in saying, why am I afraid? And dialoguing with that fear, because you may gain insight that's really, really important. And certainly I found myself on the other side of that dialogue, being able to use that stage fright to support me in knowing how to deal with a one-woman show in a different way than I would deal with performing before, because while there were similarities, there were significant differences. And so helping me move newly with the new work has been very powerful. But I gained that knowledge because I actually listened to and conversed with the fear.
That actually gives me my intro. Thank you, Janice. The other thing I'm going to assert is that writing your one-woman show was deeply meaningful for you. It wasn't just any old show. It was about a woman's ability to say no. So if it probably had been, possibly if you'd been a cartoon character that was out to entertain everybody, it might not have had the same edge that it had, because you wanted it to get across. And that's the phenomenon of deep meaning is really what I want to bring to this conversation. Also gave me the entrance into my conversation, into my fear, because I'm actually quite frightened today. The interesting thing about me being frightened is I'm rarely frightened. It takes a lot to scare me. And but when I am frightened, I'm really quite frightened of being frightened, because it's very it's just a very unusual phenomenon for me. But what I want to say is that we live lives, we either satisfy fear by living lives with very little meaning, by staying shallow and about having life not matter. Or I have found that we confront fear on many, many different levels and in many different ways, because we've chosen to make life meaningful. Deborah Merchant's husband, Russ, I have known longer than I knew her. And when we first started my work, he was fundamental, and I would go into these transcendent comas where basically he would carry me to a hot tub, hold me in the hot tub till I could come back. And so I'm a strange and unusual creature. They called me a mystic, but I also have deep faith in him, because he met me at all my most vulnerable points. And he was there 1000% in those moments of extreme vulnerability. So I had to leave my home several years ago that I thought was going to be my home for life, because I was asked to do something I could not do, which is basically get rid of all the animals that came to be with me. And I would not do that. So I left. When I left, I had no place to go. So I bought an RV, and I had two people tell me not to buy it because it seemed to have something wrong with it. $80,000 RV, to be precise. And it wasn't that I ignored them, which is what they've accused me of. It's because they had no other alternative for me. Nobody else was giving me where I could live. Nobody was telling me how, nobody helped me. So I end up with an RV that in this part of this year has cost me $16,000 only to repair her. And I still owe $64,000 on it. The part that is traumatizing, the part is multi-layered. And one of the key elements of that is living where I lived. I renovated the entire outdoors and indoors as my home. And so I had to live something I had created and that had great meaning for me. I took my dog with me. We lived in an RV park because I wasn't going to rent again, ever. And because I was hurt and frightened, and people I thought I could trust with myself, I could not. So the second piece of this is I don't think we as human beings realize that we have evidence for not being able to trust each other. And that evidence has accrued over time because of our deep need to survive our social structures. So in this case, these people needed to survive their social structures, and their neighbors had told them they would either kill the bears, who were not bothering anybody and who they never saw, by the way. They only knew about it because of a video that was on Facebook. And they would shun them as neighbors. They would consider them socially incorrect. So this has been a tumbleweed emotional experience for me, because I tumbled into all sorts of things I wasn't expecting. I got COVID. I lost my dog. For 2 years, I couldn't work effectively. I had this huge bill on my back that my beloveds took over for me for a year, and others helped support me for a year. But it was the not having my feet on the ground. It was terrifying. And being at the effect of everything was terrifying. My body, my money, which I had no problem making for years, my trust issues with people that I thought loved me. It was a perfect storm. It was basically a perfect storm. But I didn't realize till the last 2 days when finally, I'm terrified of the service department at this department. And I suddenly realized my terror of them, although you wouldn't say they have good RV bedroom manners, because I'm usually not thwarted by someone being shitty. Not at all, as a matter of fact. In fact, I'm pretty tit for tat. But I suddenly realized everything had culminated around this RV. Everything. Fear of survival. Being thrown out of my home. Trust. I mean, it covered harm in almost every level. And then spiritually, you could say I found salvation, but not solution, which is the key to this conversation for me. She is still a money drain. No one wants to buy her. She's not worth what is still owed her. She's not paying for what's still owed her. What I would have to do to make money on her, I'm 77 years old, and I can't manage what renting her out or making sure people use her right, or I just don't have the facilities. But spiritually, which is a fundamental part of my conversation, I realized that this vehicle that I was accusing and blaming for being a lemon and making her wrong for her condition simply had gathered all the bits together and represented harm, and represented that she had also protected me from harm because she had taken Lily and I in, regardless of her cost and regardless of her unworkability. So I had shared with this group before we came on the call that I'm going to bring her under my wing and I'm going to love her. And just like a child that you pay out lots of money and they still aren't getting well, I'm going to love her. And I'm going to do whatever I can do to make sure she belongs and that she gets to be useful and she gets to have a life. And people might think that's silly because it's an inanimate object, but for me, it represents my relationship with everything alive, everything that makes life have meaning for me. And I'm still terrified to go out there. And Russ is like the Rock of Gibraltar. He's just unmoved. In fact, before we got on, Deb was sharing that kind of works on both sides. Like he isn't overly emotionally gleeful either. So she says, you know, when he's happy, he sort of goes, and then back down to neutral. But in this, and he's indomitable. And he will ask every single question to make sure that he knows everything he needs to know about that RV and its usefulness. And even though I'm still scared, as I said to Victoria, I'm scared, but I'm scared inside of a rock. I'm not scared of inside of a willow that might break. And this is what we want to explore today. You know, this is what we want to just get out on the mat, because I realized one of the reasons we came together for CreateAWorld is the people we have conversations with are people who literally are making life meaningful. It doesn't, the one common denominator that I've missed in all this time we've been doing it is the people we want to have conversation with are making my life meaningful in a meaningless world. And that is a huge thing for me, but it doesn't solve my problem of the amount of money she still costs me and that she still may not work, even $16,000 later. I'm complete for the moment. Deb, you have to unmute to talk, sweetie. I mean, you can
It
talk.
solves other problems
Yes.
that are not tangible in the way we in the modern Western world have come to consider real. Solves a lot of problems. And Janice, can I present something you said before we went live? You know, Janice was pointing out that fear has been, you know, a pretty important part of human evolution. Like in the beginning, don't go in the path of the saber-toothed tiger. It really isn't a good idea. And other actual direct dangers to physical health. And I'm not sure, given how much is being discovered about how ancient, like the Neanderthals and everything, actually had a lot of art and ritual and so forth and so on. There must have been a lot more to them than just the direct physical considerations. But then things got less obvious, like when we're picking berries and which one is poisonous and which one isn't, which, which root, which grass is gonna amplify our health or detract. That's less subtle than something charging at you and about to eat you. That's so. And then as we get into modern society, she was pointing out that, a lot of the dangers we face and the fears don't come from things that are obvious that way. And, humans are pretty young as a species. And all of that is really valid. There's a huge amount in our society that keeps us in a constant state of stress and fear. And it's somehow many ways linked with survival. And I think that's really important. And then Tantra is also presencing the not really tangible in a certain sense. And I had that kind of experience just this week too, a different set of circumstances. And I've had my version of her cascade effect of one system fails, then the next, and the next. And a real strong the meaning I make of it is something's got to be reorganizing because I'm still here. So something's reorganizing. But I had a lot of fear come up, terror in some dreams I had a couple nights ago. And then I couldn't shake it. I had to set something in motion, or chose to set something in motion for some financial things to come to fruition, which is needed. And then I was doing great. Then I had those dreams, went into just abject terror, couldn't shake it. And it was getting in the way of not just functioning, but really being. I was being someone I not only didn't want to be, but I knew it was this is harder to talk about because I don't want to put it inside any kind of spiritual container, but it's a spiritual thing. It was more like there wasn't any truth or fact around my fear, terror, no fact. But I knew that fear was like leeching my life force energy, and that being in that life force energy in a sturdy or life enhancing place would contribute to the best outcome. And that's not quite the same as the good old American pull yourself up by the bootstraps and, just make the fear go away, and whatever we tend to do in our Western world. Or we tend to say the fear itself is real, whether there's fact or not, and we just worry and go be anxious and let it take us over. And I knew that was going to contribute to the failure of what I'd set in motion. Plus, my whole life was impeded. So I watched this movie that Tantra recommended, and it actually gave me a way to relate to the terror, not befriend it, basically say, be gone, but in a way where I could recalibrate and not give it so much power. But it really took something. And it's taken me many years to teach myself, really train myself not to worry. So I can access that and click it in pretty quick these days. But it took a long time because I come from a line of champion worriers. Just champion. And to worry, the more you worry meant the more you cared, and the more you were supposedly actually engaging with whatever. I mean, there's no truth to that, but that's what they were taught. So there's this whole ephemeral side to fear too, and its interconnection with our ways of being, our actual life. So I think I'm complete for now for sharing, but I'll say more later when it comes up.
Oh, I'd love to jump in.
Eh,
I heard an aphorism years ago about worrying, and I just got to say it, and then I'll share. Worrying is praying for what you do not want. Is that not a gem? So I want to share two sides of fear that I've experienced. One is the external, and it was when my husband got diagnosed with cancer. I had an emotional fear emerge about his death was imminent at that moment in time. And the opposite end of it is how he took it in. He was more like a Russ. And he was like, well, it is what it is. We'll just go with it and see what happens. And it reminds me of something like a principle that guides my life. It's not right or wrong. It's just what it is. It's that in between where I explore living my life between right and wrong. And so I was able to move with my emotion and at the same time see how he didn't get overwhelmed by emotion, that's the way he carries his thinking, and that there was a place for both to exist in conversation and through the experience. And that was about, I don't know, 10 or so years ago. We've been living in the in-between. Cancer's not right or wrong. It's just what it is. And we've been living in that. And the moments that, feel like fear rising up, you be with it as it is, maybe not befriending it necessarily, but you're with it as it is, that it's part of your life process. And we all get to do that for ourselves and with others. And then this week, it just so happens this week, I was doing an exploration through Enneagrams, which I am kind of new to it, so I can't speak to it. All I can speak to is what occurred for me in the experience of understanding who I am in the Enneagram description of how you are who you are, is that I came upon the recognition of the fear from inside me, that it's in relationship to what we call the fear of success. And I think I'm not alone in this. I think a lot of, especially women and men too, but especially women in the US culture, to step into the fullness of who we are, like stepping on that stage for you, Janice, in bringing forward who you as a woman were in this one woman stage experience. I can relate to that I'm in a year of exploration of stepping into who I am and what I offer to the world at this moment in time. And I discovered through this experience that the fear has a relationship in my physical gut of, am I worthy of myself to bring myself fully forward? Do I see myself as worthy? And because I'm so body oriented, I was thinking earlier about what you said, Tantra, of the harm that does come in our lives. Our perception and the actuality of it, they are both important. And I think about the solar plexus, that information center. And it's like getting sucker punched when we feel harm upon us, and how that relates in the physical system to our amygdala and the whole fear, fight or flight response type thing that we automatically experience, whether we pay attention or not. It's upon us. And for me, what I'm discovering and what I'm hearing in the language of this conversation is how do we move with and through our fears, our joys, our sadness, our emotion. And that has been so important for me because I am someone who moves with and through. It's not the right or wrong. It's the what is. Move with it through what is occurring in the moment. And so I guess in this moment, I'm integrating the fullness of that. And so I'm having a deep gratitude moment for this conversation that we can all share how fear moves with and through us. I'm complete.
I just want to add two things. One of the things that's interesting as an aside, I had another interesting event in Costa Rica, trying to find a place to stay again. And obviously with, and I found an extraordinary place to stay with the help of the Costa Rican family, actually. But what was so interesting to me is what you said about it is what it is. That actually is a Pura Vida. That actually is the Costa Rican way of dealing with everything, amazingly enough. And so I was in this element, like you with your husband, of this family and this other man, basically just unperturbed because it is what it is. And looking for and in the meantime, which is also interesting, they weren't traumatized by, I wasn't quite traumatized, but I was a little nervous and my phone wouldn't work in the area I was in. So I just left them a message and they would have to come show up in time for me to leave where I was. But what I found interesting is I kept having this thought like, wow, I feel like I'm in the ocean and I'm being held. But it wasn't until they're two with the same name. Luis says to me, they found me the perfect place for me. Here's the perfect place for you. Then he says, it is what it is. And I got a profound awakening out of that because they weren't, oh God, we just got to get her a place. She has no place to stay. They were, we want to find her a fine place. And for them, it is what it is. And it's such a different consciousness. And even now, I can hear it eroding something in me. It's eroding something that is cultural. I don't think I would have wanted it. I don't think I would have chosen it. And it's this cultural thing we have about what we should be afraid of. We should be afraid of cancer. We should be afraid of being homeless. But I meet a lot of homeless here. And believe me, a lot of them have preference. And so there's this should culture that we're swimming in that I think also elicits a lot of fear. And the last thing I want to say, I'll turn it over to Liz and Electra, is the conversation Russ and I had this morning was about the loss of our favorite animals. And both of us almost in stereo said, but it's worth it. But it's worth it. So I think another piece of the puzzle is where do you want to go that you will be afraid. There will be something that will happen that will make you deeply afraid, but it's worth it. So I kind of love this. We have sort of, are they aphorisms? I'm not sure the word. One is, it is what it is, and what makes fear worth it. It's kind of interesting that. Electra, over to you.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting we had this today because I had dreams last night where something wrong was happening to my daughter, to the point that I would wake myself up and try and go to another dream. And again, it happened. And so finally I just left my bed and went to another part of the house and was able to stop it. What I've noticed since I was a mother of young children was that if I dreamed about something happening bad to my children, it meant I was doing something that I wasn't paying. There was something I wasn't paying attention to in other stuff that I do. Like I wasn't working on a project. I wasn't giving something time. So it was that. And I hadn't thought about that because I've been having these dreams or daydreams about something bad happening to my daughter and her daughters. And I think it has to do more with unspoken fear within myself. I have an animal that is aging and dying. She's in the dying process, and that brings up a lot of fear and sadness. So what's true, what I'm picking up from this is to be able to sit with fear and say, what are you trying to talk to me about? What's it really about? It's not about the dream last night wasn't about my daughter being in any kind of danger. It probably has to do with the fears that I'm not talking about to myself that I get to examine now. I think it has to do with my one cat dying. And it may just be, kind of not being in control of the world. And so it's sometimes being fearful about something gives us something to grab onto when you don't know where the rest of your life is going. So you can be fearful about something, at least you can grab onto it. And I think that's it. That fear actually turns out to be a stabilization point when the rest of the world is kind of unknown. Okay.
So much richness here. I was thinking of several things, and the first thing that came to mind was when you were talking, Janice. It took me right back to being a senior in high school and being in my very last recital for piano. And there were a lot of people, and I was sitting here trying to think, well, was it 100 or, I mean, there were a lot of people there. The amount doesn't matter, but yet it does, because in my mind, there was a huge room full of so many people, right? And I was playing a piece that I knew. I mean, it was in my body memory. I thought, oh, this is going to be a breeze, and got to one point and freeze. And so I relived that a few minutes ago. The sucker punch. And what I just realized is that was my first experience of having fear work with me. And I heard some that intake of breath in the audience. And then all of a sudden, I just felt this huge rush of love from complete strangers. And I went, oh, the audience is with me. And I mean, I was blank. I had my hands on the piano, and I thought, okay, if I just put my hands where I think I need to put them, maybe it'll come back. And, I'm shaking. And then feeling that huge rush, it was amazing. And then all of a sudden, boom, right, it came back, and I finished, and I got a huge amount of applause. But that was my first memory, at least it's coming to me now, of having fear work with, as you've all said, and knowing that I wasn't alone, and having others surround me and be with me. So that was huge. The other thing that really comes to mind is a really significant period in my life of when I chose to step out and leave my marriage. And just I think that was the hardest, the hardest time in my life. And I had several pieces of music that I used to help move me through. Just, I was frozen. And a lot of that was for me coming to use my voice, and coming as a woman to know that I deserve to have a life where I had control of myself. And so feeling that again just now, took me to the next step, which was being in some training because I'm an educator. And what was so meaningful for me was learning to take the fear and use it as compost. And as I'll quote my dear nurtured heart approach developer, Howard Glasser, he said, use the fear as jet fuel to propel you to whatever is next. And so that's been another really helpful, how should I say, container for me, I guess, because I imagine compost and how powerful it is, to be with that, as you said, Victoria, to be with it, and to propel us into what is next, and not to be solving anything in the moment. And that's also helped me work with students who are fearful in the moment of being less than because they don't understand something. And just sitting with that and sitting in it and acknowledging it and seeing how powerful that is. And for a student to see how it is to be heard in that fear, and then to be able to honor it and acknowledge it. So, and not to have to solve anything. I love that. Just to be with it. And I also like what you said about not befriending it necessarily, but to be in relationship with it and to move with it to whatever is next. So I'm complete.
I just want to thank the people that are, I'm copying what you're saying into our chat so we can, it's really, it's one thing that we really want to promote is you being part of the conversation also. And so we do read what you write, and we also respond to it. You may find us responding to it also. So thank you. Deb?
Yeah, I'm just really struck by what several of you have said. The idea of befriending fear has never occurred to me, and it's going to take me a little to wrap myself around that one. But listening to what fear tells me, or compost. I love compost. Compost is just really cool. But listening to what fear is telling me, I can get a little handhold there, because I can, is fear telling me, hey, a car's about to hit me, step back, I can get it a little. But I'm listening to you all in light of my experience that I described and what Tantra described, what each of us are talking about. I don't know. I'm going to have to really work that one, because for me, giving anything to the fear, it was taking me down. And I couldn't find anything of value being communicated. I'm like reviewing it all as you're all talking, because that's such an interesting idea. But I had no access there at all. And yet, like I said, I watched that movie. That helped me recalibrate a little, because it could have been called a scary movie, but it helped me recalibrate. Like, how do I orient relationship? There we go. I hadn't thought of that. How do I orient to this energy that's just really getting in my way of thinking, feeling, functioning, contributing to an outcome which still hasn't happened yet. So I don't know the outcome, But wow. I don't know. I don't know how to orient the way you all are talking about. I really don't. It's just, but I could orient to, suddenly the thought came to me, what if this energy is something else? I could get that far. What if this is just energy? What if I called it something else? And I don't mean to make it sound like just some intellectual playground, but I had to find a way to get through. I can't conclude what I'm saying.
I want to respond to it though, Deb, because I think it's one of the, I'm not saying you're doing this, but I just want to reinforce that we have a knee-jerk reaction to trying to solve the issue of fear, to never be afraid again. It's like a knee-jerk, like all of us have it. There's nobody doesn't have that. I was really, really sure with Russ coming, I wouldn't be afraid to go out there. Well, not going that way. However, it was interesting because one of the people said, rebounding from being sucker punched just yesterday, and yes, it is what it is feeling profound. So it is why the conversation of a group of a cultural community, that means people interested in being here vitally, when it isn't about a specific community, but being community, is that when we have the ability, like I suddenly realized in Costa Rica why I started calming down and why I ended up having a fantastic time because of this weird thing, Paravita, and it is what it is. But do I have ability to wrap my head around it and to apply it? No, not at all. But it will stay with me now.
That's right.
I will be able to identify something that has not been able to be identified before. It just hasn't been, but it's really an important, what you're bringing up is really important because we live in solving a problem. We don't live in being in relationship with. And to be in relationship with, we have to live with others, what we say in the field of Tantra Mod, in the field of creation. And living in the field, we have more possibilities of what could be applicable. Like now it is what it is. I can't apply it to the RV and going to find out if it's not working again. It is what it is not even on my ballot. I can't get there. I am my fear ratio, if I put it to language right now, is I hope to God it's not broken again. I hope they got it fixed and I hope it stays fixed. And 100% I think it isn't. And I'm psychic, which makes it even worse.
Right.
Because I don't think I'm right psychically. It's all fear.
Yeah.
So the point is that to start to pull apart, maybe would it be different options for how fear shows up and what's applicable? Because I'm pretty sure almost everybody on this group, except for you and I, would not be necessarily empowered by that movie that I suggested that you watch.
Probably not.
Probably not. So the point is that in a common interest, that's what community is, common interest. In a common interest, we have more options. We have more life living among us to apply.
Right.
Victoria?
And what's the ground of common interest that we all have? Our capacity to be an observer. And for me, that's what being in it is what it is about. Using that capacity as an observer to guide through, moving with and through whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is.
Isn't it interesting? I can hear you when you say it as what you just said, as an observer. The phrase, it is what it is, really sets me off. Like, I don't even want to go there because I'll just, except I can get glimpses And in terms of, being with animals dying, for example, it isn't just that I've had that experience several times. I've always been that way. Even when I was knee high to a gopher and it was my goldfish, I could be with the process, however I felt. And I could be with that, the fear, the anguish, all of it,
Mhm.
on behalf of something which I still don't know how to name. I don't know that I want to name it. I don't care if somebody's got a name for it, that's great. Compost is all about decomposing stuff that once was alive for something even more life-giving or just as life-giving to come at the end. And that's something I really enjoy. I mean, I know that's an odd hobby or whatever, but it is an odd thing for a lot of people. But
It is what it is, Deb.
it is what it is. Thank you, Dr.
It's a nourishment too, at the
Yeah.
same time.
And there's something different. I assert, by my witness and observing, there's something different about having Russ there with you. You're still afraid. It still could be overwhelming, but something has changed by with another in the field, or however one would say it.
It's very easy. I don't have to handle what I'm going through alone. It's not, that is the magic of being human. We only have a few minutes, Deb. Can we go over to Janice, who's kind
Please.
of popping?
Yeah, so I think for me, part of the benefit of being in conversation with fear is right positioning. I mean, Tantra has said to me so often that, that yes, you're in a problem, but the good news is you're in the right problem. And so you might as well be in the right problem. And I flash back to when I was teaching, and I was newly teaching what they called a gifted and talented program in a high school, and the English teacher, the social studies teacher, and myself as a science teacher, we shared 90 kids, and so we would like every when we had the quiz to give, we would give them to all 90 kids at the same time. And so I was giving the vocabulary quiz for the English teacher to my kids were freaking out. They're like, "We need 5 more minutes to study." And I said to them, like, "Okay, let's take a breath." I'm like, I want you to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen if you fail this quiz? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, I'll get a bad grade for the quarter. Okay, and if you get a bad grade for the quarter, what's the worst thing that could happen as a result of that? Well, but so we kind of went out a couple of rounds, and I said, look, the bottom line is failing this quiz is not going to make you homeless. So it's like, can we get this back into right positioning? And so, like for me with the stage fright, part of the right positioning was recognizing there were some tweaks that I could make in the show that would make it easier for me to memorize. And so that could reduce some of my stress. There were ways that I worked with my coach to reblock my show so that it helped me leverage my body memory more. But I wouldn't have been able to get things into right positioning if I hadn't been willing to engage in a conversation with fear. And so I think there's something in getting to what really is true versus what is masquerading as truth.
Reminds me of a phrase that they used to teach us, and they would say, fear is really fantasy experienced as real. And I think that actually helps you step back into the observer and go, really? What about this is fantasy? It's the conversation you had with the kids. Stop making it more than what it is. Let's find out what it is first. And then you deal with it. Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes. I'm actually going to close the conversation. I want to thank all of you that were on today, and all of you that will watch it, because I've been watching how many people actually watch these, and there's quite a bit of you. So I'm thanking you ahead of time, even though you're not here today. When we started CreateAWorld, and we're going to meet right after this too, we had a plan, we had a plot, and in a very interesting way, in a very almost ephemeral way, we just wanted to get our feet wet. And then we wanted to get used to being in a public setting and wanted to see what started to show up. But one of our dreams was to also have a public forum. And when we get off this call and we go to our meeting, I think this is a great public forum on fear. I think this is a great opportunity. And to really, not only that, but as human beings to get used to being in dialogue with each other, just dialoguing, not coming to us as authorities to solve problems, but that's what the sovereign, being in respect of the sovereign nature of each human being, is very much what all of us as collaborators are committed to. We do not feel hierarchical. We do not operate as if we're authorities, and yet we're pretty good resources in a lot of areas, but not here. Who we want to be here is being with people with a common interest, even everybody standing in their own life's interest, in their own life living. And so we'll get back to you on this. We're a creation in creation. But this was lovely today, especially watching those of you in the chat begin to dialogue with each other, which is, so we've been, how long, Janice, when did we start this?
It'll be 2 years in September.
Yeah. So I really want to let you know that we've been hanging out in this for 2 years, for actually probably this day, when we began to see that people in the chat dialogue with each other, when we began to realize there's a common interest that we can invite people to be part of. So whatever your interest is, whatever you're pursuing, whatever matters to you, it's not going to happen like that. We have worlds failing, whole ideas about what life is collapsing on top of us. We have fear rampant, both real and not real. But some of the not real may soon be real, which is another way we prepare for futures. So we're just really appreciative of all of you that have participated as a part of the conversation, and also those of you that have watched. And I was even thinking that when we do our next CreateAWorld, we'll ask those watching to dialogue with each other. I mean, don't we anyway? Don't you sit in an auditorium and unless they tell you can't talk, you're commenting on the play? It's worth it. It's worth it to be in dialogue. So thank you very much. And anything for anybody? We got 2 minutes. Say goodbye.